Hello my friends and welcome back. I'm Chisgule Gaming, and in today's video, sponsored by the makers of Call of Dragons, I want to talk about how you set up really amazing, fair, and balanced seasons in Call of Dragons. And it became apparent to me from my last season in this game that the people leading the biggest kingdoms in this game actually don't understand how to do this yet. And so I thought it would be genuinely helpful to explain how to make for an amazingly balanced season. And if you just look at the power, you will be sorely disappointed. So if you look at two groups of people and you said, well, our power is equal, their power is equal, fair fight, that would demonstrate a deep misunderstanding of the way the game works. There are other factors like activity level, the depth of roster. So like, do they have the better artifacts? Do they have the better pets? Do they have the better heroes, right? All of these things really stack up. And one of the biggest factors is actually map position. And I'm going to emphasize that because we're going to spend a bunch of time in this video talking about map position. But I also need to mention that like in a healthy situation for creating good fights, there will be a dialogue between the leaders of these kingdoms at the start of the KVK. In our last KVK, that didn't happen. Okay, the strongest kingdoms said, we're going to ally up. This is what it is. You all deal with it. The power is equal. It's a fair fight. Okay, and that's how it went down. Which is, you know, from the perspective of a top tier kingdom and Rise of Kingdoms, I think any king of those kingdoms would look at that and go, what a joke. And it just is what it is. Go ask them. You see for yourself, okay? And they would look at it and they would say, oh, so you just wanted to make an easy fight for yourself. I mean, just own it, and that's okay. Like, it's okay, not really, for a top kingdom to take an easy fight. But like, if that's what you're doing, at least own that that's what you've done. But I think this is genuinely a misunderstanding of what these kingdoms are doing. They don't realize what they're doing. They need a little help. That's what this video is for. Now that I've unintentionally kind of insulted their intelligence, let me go help you out. I'm like, okay, I'm like genuinely not trying to do that. But like also, it is a little disappointing, even though we had a lot of fun this season, that like there could have been something much cooler that happened, and like the players chose something really ridiculous and less than what it could have been. So let's go actually get a look at the map and talk about that most important factor, the map setup. So beyond just the conversations that happen, that should happen in a proper matchmaking situation between the leaders of these kingdoms, understanding the map is absolutely essential. And I think this is the piece of the puzzle that like somehow in a strategy game, people still don't understand. It's important to understand that when you look at this map, okay, this particular format, the Winter is Upon Us, this is a 2v2v2 setup. It is intended for a sort of, well, as I said, 2v2v2, almost like a free-for-all situation, okay? Compare that to the other map, the Calling of Courage. This is designed to be a 2v2 situation, okay? So let's go get a closer look at these maps and zoom in a bit and talk about why it is that these work this way and how you can make amazing seasons by virtue of understanding this. All right, so here we are in the Winter is Coming 2v2v2, and the reason it is a 2v2v2 is because of the way that these zones are set up. So these two zones enter into the same next zone, all right? These two zones over here enter into the same next zone. These two zones enter into the same next zone. And a premise to all of this, right, is that in a balanced and exciting season, there's a fight for the dragon in the middle. So if the season does not culminate in a huge fight for this zone for control of the dragon, then I will argue the greatest opportunity for the greatest fight was completely left on the table. Okay. And there was a huge miss in the way that the diplo worked out in that situation. Or one group was trying to create an easy win, which is often the case. So how would you set this up to create, in my opinion, that really exciting fight? Well, I think what has to happen is that either you do that 2v2 that I'm describing, where like, for example, right, like these groups are going to fight each other. They will get into these zones for free. Okay. And then the question becomes, well, what do you do with this third group? As I'm describing with a 2v2v2, this third group has access to its own zone, okay? And all three groups have the opportunity to contest for the dragon, wrong color, cheesy, right? There is sort of touch points between these groups. Like there could be a fight over here. There could be a fight over here in this zone. I think I'm tapping the colors, but actually I'm not. Okay. There could be a fight over here in this zone before you actually get to these other zones that you sort of get for free. Okay. And this would be a really cool situation, assuming that each of the 2v2 groups actually has sort of an equivalent-ish punching power. So if I were a developer putting these kingdoms onto the map, I would try to balance this map. And I think this is extremely obvious. I would try to balance this map such that each of the groups I've circled are approximately equal punching power. Okay? So that you get a really great experience in this map. To me, that's all very, 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 very obvious. The next thing we can talk about, though, is, okay, but what if we actually want to do 3v3 Chisgule? Because what I think most players will do in almost every situation is take a 3v3 instead of a 2v2v2. The free-for-all format is fraught with peril. You're going to have people that complain and feel like they're ganged up on. It takes a very high level of sophistication of the player base to maximize the experience in this kind of a KVK. So what I think is more likely is that you will end up with a situation more like this, where one side of this zone will theoretically be owned by one group, and one side of this zone will theoretically be owned by the other group, okay? And these guys will join sides, right? So, like, you could switch which side they're joining. So, to draw this the other way, you could have these guys join like this, and it could be contentious. But even that is problematic. Why? Because you basically end up with a 2v1 situation in this area, and technically it could become a 3v1 situation, right? But also these guys will be facing the 2v1 over here. So this is a more tricky way to do it. It's a lot more simple the other way I drew it, where like all the allies are right next to each other, and that increases the chances by quite a lot that you end up with the best case scenario. And that best case scenario is going to be that incredibly exciting Kingsland fight. And again, the way that that would work is you would ally such that the map ultimately looks like this. For that to be accomplished, there's something very critical here, which is that these two groups need to be approximately equal punching power such that no one group takes control of this zone and eliminates one group from the map before the Dragon Zone opens. Because if that happens, the season is effectively over unless the remaining parties on field are absolutely that dominant. And sort of this is what happened in our last season, where not only did the sort of strongest groups ally each other, which in my estimation doesn't make any sense, but then also we had an ally over here, okay? And it actually was this weird situation kind of like this. And this group was much, much, much stronger than this group. And no disrespect to our allies. Our allies were awesome. In fact, our allies had an insane amount of courage battling into what was very obviously ridiculous odds all season long, which was really cool. Like, they were so cool about the fact that this season made no sense. But like, so they got locked, right? And the season is over here, right? This is a dead season. Unless you're saying these two groups are so strong, they can beat all the other groups. This is a dead season. And this was extremely knowable in our particular case. And these folks that created this situation would have known if they'd had any conversations with us all, really, any meaningful conversations. Because, like, as it turns out, a whole bunch of the top end from this group had migrated to our kingdom before this season. So, like, this kingdom was deeply missing the top end. So there was no way, and it's not a criticism of them at all. There's just no way they were going to take this fight against the folks that were in the other zone in blue, right? It was very knowable that was going to be an almost certainly no world in which they could sort of hold the zone. And they gave it their all, and I respect the hell out of that. But, like, again, our allies put up an amazing, amazing season, all things considered, that, like, Just looking at this map, it was so obvious. Like literally before the season started, I was like, oh, that's what it's going to be, isn't it? And in the future, I should just record these videos in like from day one of Diplo to be like, I told you so. Because then I can at least point to it and be like, this was so obvious. Anyone who studies this stuff would know. And I've been making these sorts of maps about KVKs for literally years in Rise of Kingdoms. So like got a lot of experience with these kinds of predictions. Okay. So all that said, this map takes a high level of sophistication. In my opinion, it is my genuine hope that we don't queue for this map again, because I don't trust other groups to have the level of sophistication to create a great season, right? I really don't. The only way I would trust that we could end up with a good situation is if sufficiently sophisticated leadership is involved in creating that situation. I think the easier to create a great outcome KVK from a Diplo standpoint is actually the other KVK. It's this one right over here. This is where I think it's the easiest to create like a really, really, really great situation. And why is that? Well, we zoom in. Let's get to drawing, shall we? Your boy Cheese gets out the markers. Okay, so in this KVK format, it is a ideal candidate for 2v2. I would not recommend 1v1, v1, v1. That will be weird. And people will almost certainly accuse of like ganging up, okay? But the flow of the zones here is that first you get like a little side fight over here. I'll use this color, all right? First you get this little fight over here. Then you move into, and I guess you could fight in this zone as well. So this is like, you have two ways to go. You choose which way to go. Then you get a zone for free, all right? So you get a zone for free. Okay, and then you fight for these zones, and it lasts a long time. Okay, and then there's entry into Kingsland. So if you believe me, okay, that a good KVK is one in which there's a Dragon Zone fight, then there are only so many ways to do this. One is that you take the folks that are next to each other and make them allies, all right? And if we did something like this, right, this zone is free. You would fight for this zone. They would fight for this zone, right? And we draw the rest of this, okay? And it's a little sloppy, but it's good enough, right? This zone is free. Fight for this. Then you move into these zones, okay? And it's very, unless one group greatly outpowers another, it's kind of difficult to push into these zones. Now, the way the Bastion system works has been really interesting for this. We don't need to talk about that right now. But theoretically, this would create a lot of opportunity for there to be a good situation. This actually maximizes the opportunity, in my estimation, for a really cool Kingsland fight. Assuming that the power of these kingdoms in these different corners actually makes sense, and not just the power, but the activity level and the depth of roster and all those things that I was talking about before, right? But when that's not the case, the other way you might consider running this, besides like the obvious situation of like, you know, instead of the top two versus the bottom, you could do left versus right. Very obvious. That's another similar way you could do this, okay? The other way to run it, and the way that we ran it, because the folks over here, under no circumstance would they ever ally with us. They're the group that betrayed us in the past, okay? When we did this, we allied like this in order to maximize the amount of fighting in this season. And we ultimately lost this season because 3 players could defend a bastion and we couldn't get past it with 3, despite absolute and complete field dominance against the group in this corner. We sort of pushed into this zone. Oh, this zone was free. Let me draw it. Let me draw the whole thing. Let me draw the whole thing. All right. You've got these guys over here. All right. Blah, blah, blah. Everybody enters into their next zones. Okay. And despite the fact that we could sort of push into here, they created a bastion situation that like it was impassable. Like we had the rallies to do the thing and trade, fine. But like 3 people could fill the bastion and it was over. And our allies over here could not do the same thing. So ultimately they lost ground. And that was that, right? And it was like actually, it was very painful, just like having actually just nothing we could do to get through this bastion. And now bastions work differently, which is good. And there may even be room still to push more on the fact that, like, if you have field superiority, should you be able to get past a position or not? But without getting into all that, this is the other way you could set up the season. This creates, I think, a lot of fighting opportunity, and I would say has the most risk for potentially not having a Kingsland fight in the end, where, like, you know, there's technically 2 passes in each one of these, right? But the way we ended up having to do this fight was that essentially, I don't know, do I just want to draw over what's here? Essentially, this zone was completely lost. We got stuck on a single bastion with absolutely no way past it. And so we had to go into Kingsland 2v1. And, like, the fact that we did that at all for as long as we did is insane. And our allies absolutely pushed and contributed. But, like, the fact that they could 2v1 us anytime they wanted, whereas we could only 1v2 them, or 1v1 them if they were being not smart about it, it's like, yeah, we're cooked. Right? Like, season, as soon as this situation was created, the chances of our winning this season was very, 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 very slim. And so this is what I sort of talk about when I say, like, you need to understand every kingdom's level of sophistication for Rally Garrison. Now, at the time this happened, this was the very first season where bastions were introduced into the game. So, like, there was not actually experience with how that was going to go for doing the diplo there, right? Like, Rally Garrison mattered, but not ever as much as it mattered here. Because if there were no bastions in this, then hilariously, when we did this season, okay, the way this would have worked is this would have been overrun and we would have won, okay, and it would have been over. And then Echo would have been in this sort of situation where they had to 2v1 wherever we wanted it to be a 2v1. And then we could 2v1 the other guys whenever we wanted to 2v1 them, right? Okay, one more thing I want to add in later, I realize I need to say this, is that in this situation that I'm talking about where the folks below us had betrayed us, we weren't going to ally them. They weren't going to ally us, really. And the other folks we could have allied with in the top right, if we'd done that, like, it would have been a steamroll season, joke of a season, very minimal fighting. We would have absolutely, completely raffle stomped the entire map, right? So the one and only situation that made sense, based on conversations that were happening, and was to ally the bottom right corner. And, you know, like, BDO actually doing the thing that I say that a big kingdom ought to be doing, which is taking the hardest potentially winnable fight, right? And, like, potentially winnable is the key. If you're definitely going to win, you did Diplo wrong, my opinion. You set up a boring season if you know one side definitely wins, all right? I mean, I'm going to stand by that, by the way. GG. But Bastion's, like, dramatically, irreversibly changed, like, what winning looks like and takes in this game. And, like, every kingdom must have meta Rally Garrison. Every kingdom must have the willingness and ability to put that meta captain in and lose troops until the situation is resolved. Like, whether it's time passing or right? So this was still a lot of fighting in this season, and it was a really cool season. But I do think in general, like, one little bastion on one impassable spot with absolutely no way around it. And trust me, our territory team looked at literally everything. Anyone who says otherwise doesn't actually know. We looked at everything, no way around it. The road length wasn't there. We tried it all. It's GG's, right? It was GG's. And so, where does this leave us? In summary, if you want to have great seasons, you have to look at the punching power. You have to look at the ability and willingness to lose dead troops. You have to look at the Rally Garrison situation. And if every group actually has sort of meta Rally Garrison. And there's probably some other stuff too that, you know, if you actually start to consider all these factors, right? Some of them I probably mentioned earlier in this video, but, like, I don't know, Chad, I had a baby. Like, in the last month and a half or so. So I'm like very sleep deprived. My brain works mostly, but like enough to give you this information and say, I bet this is really helpful. And I bet as a function of this video, people will create better seasons. At least that's my hope, that like leaders of the bigger kingdoms are going to actually start to understand, oh, okay, if we want to do this right and we want to actually be one of the biggest, baddest kingdoms in the game, here's what we actually need to do. All right. If you enjoyed the vid, throw a like on here, subscribe. Apparently your boy Cheese is on a real spree of creating contentious videos that I will point to in a year ago and go, I told you so. Because what I'm saying here is not even remotely controversial. It's just proven from how these games work. And like look, did this for 6 years in Rise of Kingdoms. And this game's made by the same people and has the same patterns. What if we actually follow the patterns? Anyways, if you want to see the last vid I'm talking about here, where I put my stake in the ground about dead troops, you check the vid right over here. Until next time, you have fun smashing your enemies. Take care, everybody.